Laudetur Jesus Christus. This is our lesson 6. This time let's look at some personal pronouns. I, you, he, she, and it. Again, we're going to look at these in singular. For now, we're not going to discuss the plural, we, you all, and they. So, ego is I, ego. Tu is you. And he, she, and it would be ille, illa, illud. Ille, illa, illud. So again, ego, tu, ille, illa, illud. And these are also declined. So what we just stated was a nominativus, and the genitivus of ego would be mei, dativus mihi, accusativus me, and ablativus me. Tu is a nominativus, genitivus tui, dativus tibi, accusativus te, and ablativus te. And finally, the nominativus of he, she, and it is ille, illa, illud. The genitivus would be illius, illius, illius. The reason why I say it 3 times is because all masculine, feminine, and neutral are all the same. They have the same form in the genitivus. So again, nominativus ille, illa, illud, genitivus illius, 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 dativus illi, 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 accusativus illum, illam, illud, and ablativus illo, illa, illo. And now let's look at some very basic examples. I have a son. Habeo is I have. Ego habeo filium. You have a son. Tu habes filium. She has a son. Illa habet filium. The following examples are genitivus. The name of my son, nomen filii mei, of mine, mei. Nomen filii mei. The name of your son, nomen filii tui. The name of his or her son, nomen filii illius. So these were the genitivus examples. Now let's look at dativus. Crede mihi, believe to me, believe me. Crede mihi. Credo tibi, I believe you. Credo tibi. I believe him or I believe her. Credo illi. Accusativus. Tu vides me, you see me. Tu vides me. Ego video te, I see you. Ego video te. I see him. Ego video illum. Or ego video illam. I see her. Or ego video illud. I see it. And finally, the ablativus. Loquor, I speak. Loquor de me. I speak about myself. I speak of myself. Loquor de te. I speak of you. Loquor de illo. I speak of him. Or I speak of her. Loquor de illa. So here we have examples of personal pronouns and for various cases we have various examples, just as a way of introduction. Now let's start saying something about verbs. Verbum, verbi, is declined like filius, filii, verbum, verbi, verbo, verbum, verbo, as in filius, filii, filio, filium, filio. Verbum means a verb that is a word that describes some action. Latin verbs are made up of a part that's called a stem and a part that's called an ending. So let's look at some examples. First example would be laudo, which means I praise. Laudo. And the principal parts of a verb are something that is taught in English also. For example, if I want to know what are the principal parts of work, we would say present, work, infinitive, to work, past tense, worked, and past participle, worked or have worked. And with those principal parts, we have, once we know those principal parts, we can form, if we know the rules, any other verbal form out of those principal parts. Now in English it's very simple because all we do is add the letters ed for past, worked, and for the past participle, have worked. And there's really nothing else to learn about it except for the so-called irregular verbs, as for example, to see, I saw, and I have seen. So those are irregular, and there you have to know specifically how that particular irregular verb is what are the principal parts of that verb. In Latin, the system is different. As I said, we have the stem and the personal endings. Let's look at some examples first before I explain what I mean by that. Let's look at the first example. The stem of this one ends in a. And the example is laudo, laudare, laudavi, laudatus. Laudo is present, laudare is infinitive, laudavi is past, and laudatus is the past participle, just as we saw in English. So laudo, laudare, laudavi, laudatus. And the stem is lauda, which ends with the letter a. Let's look at the second example. There the stem is ending with the letter e. And this is the word videre, which means to see. Video, I see. Videre, to see. I saw, vidi. And past participle is visus. So video, videre, vidi, visus. And the stem is vide. The third example is dico, which means to say. Dico, dicere, dixi, dictus. And the stem ends with a consonant, dic. Dico, dicere, dixi, dictus. And the fourth example is a verb that ends, whose stem is ending in e. audio, which means to hear, audio, audire, audivi, auditus. So these are the principal parts of 4 types of verbs. And the endings of these verbs are used to in a system which is called conjugation. We can change the ending so that it defines who is doing the acting. Is it I, is it you, or is it he, or is it us, or you all, or they? And these are called personal endings, because the ending stands for, well, let's look at some examples. First, let me tell you what the endings are. In singular, it's O, S, letter S, and T, letter T. O, S, T. And plural is mus, tis, nt. I know it sounds unusual to hear it by itself, but that's what the so-called suffixa personalia are. O, or sometimes letter M, O, or S, T, mus, tis, nt. The O stands for I, the S stands for you, and the T stands for he, she, or it. Let's look at some examples so that this can make a little more sense to us. Let's take the first one, laudare, which means to praise. Ego laudo. You see, there is the O, laudo. Tu laudas. There is the S. And ille laudat. O, S, T are the endings. I don't even need to say ego laudo, because when I say laudo, the ending tells me that this is the first person, that I could also say only laudas, because the ending s tells me that it is you. And the ending t stands for he, she, or it. So I could just say laudat. I could say laudo, laudas, laudat. So the endings tell me who, what person is doing that particular action. So let's look at all of these examples. The first, conjugation, ego laudo, tu laudas, ille laudat. The second conjugation, to see, ego video, tu vides, ille videt. Third conjugation, where the stem ends in a consonant, ego dico, I say, tu dicis, ille dicit. And the fourth conjugation, to hear, ego audio, tu audis, ille audit. And with that, our 15 minutes of Latin a day comes to an end. I hope to take this up in much greater detail in our coming lessons.